So far, looks pretty good where they're finished. The one road that's not finished still had a little trouble, but that's because we have gutter blocking the rain from getting to the street.
That's good.
Aaron, is it working okay for Walter on Evans? He was so concerned about it.
I tried to get down there during a bigger one. Any of the ones I've seen, I haven't seen any concerns.
Yeah, I haven't gotten any phone calls.
Thought that having it on the other side actually would be better.
On Second. I was thinking on Evans down where Walter had that steep driveway, he was concerned.
Right. But there was also, we moved where the inlet was from the west over to the east side. Yeah. And I really think more water came from the east, and I think that's helping him. Or actually, I think it was the other way around. Sorry. I think we reversed that. And I saw everything coming around the curve at 4th and Evans racing towards him. And now it's dropping in the inlet instead of going towards him.
Good evening, Counselor.
Good evening, Mayor Angela.
Hey, Brandon.
Hi, Victoria.
Does anyone know if Trustee Wah made it back this weekend as planned?
I'm not sure, but I haven't seen them. You know, they just live 2 houses down from me. I haven't seen any indication. No chickens, so I don't know.
My calendar just showed they were supposed to get back yesterday, but I didn't know if they did.
So let's.
I'm looking down the street. I don't see him.
Oh, and Trustee Carabas is in the house.
Yes. So let's start. Could we have some staff background?
I can try to give it. I was asked to kind of look at rights of way, historic rights of way, encroachments in the R1 zoning. And I did my best to address the issue, based on what I understood. I want to go back to, we have wide rights of way in town. They were typically created during the original town plat. We have several of these streets where we have an 80-foot right of way. In those rights of way, they're dedicated for public use and public access, as well as utilities. So these are, in newer subdivisions, they're a lot of times smaller, but when towns were platted in the 1800s, some of them were even larger. In Utah and several towns, they have a 120-foot right of way and for those, they were for these massive stagecoach wagons to turn around. That was the turning radius of one of those. Oftentimes, in these smaller towns, it was for a horse and buggy, and that was the turnaround radius. But so these, what rights of way are, they are town-owned land. Again, it's used for access to individual parcels and for the delivery of utilities and infrastructure. And so several areas throughout town, we do have those. um, typically towns do not give away right of way unless there's a extenuated circumstance, because the demand for future expansion can always be there. And meaning that we have some unforeseen circumstances that require some infrastructure that at this time might not be known. We allow and encourage residents to take care of that land. And if they want to construct on that right of way, most towns have a encroachment license process. And that process is oftentimes at the lower level, meaning when there's a small improvement like a fence or a landscape wall, something that has some investment, but may not have a significant investment like a building per se. Those towns have an administrative review process whereby there's a license that somebody submits a plan for some type of construction, like a fence, and then we accept that kind of submittal, and we look at the site plan. We study our plans to date, any master plans like sewer, water, infrastructure. We may even do locates to see what's there. And as part of that process, we have this evaluation. And then there's what is often termed a revocable license permit for a encroachment license, where yes, you are allowed to construct said fence, but if the town does need that land in the future, then we will ask you to remove that because that is town-owned land. So in many cases, that's the preferred mechanism. Small things like trees or grass, flowers, they don't require such a landscape permit or an encroachment permit. But things like a fence that have, that are structures typically do. Walls typically do. So it's a way that we kind of work with the adjacent landowner, towns work with the adjacent landowner to allow some development, but also protect the future kind of developability of that in case roads need to expand or utilities need to be expanded. Sidewalks need a little bit wider for some reason, or you need a trail in the future. That is, there are two issues here, and I wanted to handle them because they're related. I wanted to talk about encroachments and right-of-ways first, and then we can talk about the R1 zoning, which is slightly different but related. So I thought I'd stop there and see if there were any questions on encroachments, etc. Well, one more thing. In the packet two meetings ago, I had a recommended process for encroachment, creating a minor encroachment review process whereby that doesn't have to come to the Board of Trustees. Historically in the Town Alliance, any encroachment into private land has to come to the Board of Trustees. That's not in the code, but it has been practiced by the town when permitting any development therein. So the town has to accept it, create a license, and then bring it to the Board of Trustees with a resolution for approval. That has some cost associated with staff time, potentially legal time reviewing the resolution, and delays development. So we would, I know we can't make a decision today, but it was that recommendation 2 meetings ago to come up with that administrative process. So for those smaller encroachment items like fences or landscape walls that we recommend planning staff, utilities, public works will look at it and make an informed decision at that point in time. So with that, I'll stop there and see if there are any questions with regard to the rights of way and encroachment licenses.
Any questions? Trustee Miller?
Yeah, I guess I have a few. My first question is, I don't understand the disconnect between the assessor's office and what they file as far as property owner's piece of land and what the town of Lyons has on file for what the properties are. To me, from what I've seen, there's a disconnect there where the landowners think that they own more of the property than they actually do, according to the town. But according to the Boulder County Assessor's Office, and most likely their title or deed, it's not the same. And there's obviously a disconnect somewhere. And I'm wondering how that happens and where you think that's coming from.
Trustee Miller, can you explain, is it the graphical depiction that's causing the confusion?
No, I mean the actual square footage and survey, like the lines, the footage that is recorded. I mean, there's discrepancies. And so
so there's either two issues here, I potentially, in not knowing the specifics of all this would be looked at a case-by-case basis. I would not assume this is a problem that is universal to all properties. However, there's one of two things is going on here. Probably is what I'm thinking. Is that one, if you look through the entire record on the assessor's office, or you do a title search on the property, you will see the town's interest somewhere in that chain of title. And that just because you're looking at a deed doesn't mean that's the entire title history of the property. So that could be one issue that's going on. And two, just because you have a property and you have a deed to it doesn't mean it's not subject to other interests. And kind of back to my earlier comment, I mean, you have to look at a case-by-case basis, but you have to do a pretty extensive title search to figure out what exactly you own. And just looking at one document may not be enough. Without knowing exactly what the issue is, though, it's hard to say for every property what the disconnect is.
I agree.
Okay.
I think sometimes people look at the assessor's site and you see those aerial, photos with the lines. Those cannot be counted on as accurate. Those can be off by as much as 10 or 20 feet. What we really have to go by is your legal description.
Yeah.
And in your situation, Habitat confirmed with me that the property line is just in front of the porches. They think that's the case too. And I don't know if that didn't get communicated in your situation, but I think we need to just, now that everybody's back and we're all settled in for this week, let's take a look at your particular documents in regard to what your deed says and the survey says.
Sure, but I mean, I'm not necessarily just talking about my case. I'm also talking about others' cases, especially when this whole south side of town kind of got upheaved, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's been several other folks that have, said, my whole yard is gone, and maybe that's more of a R1 zoning issue or what, but 80
No, I think
right away is so large that I mean, yeah, okay, maybe we don't give it up because there's a particularly, there might be a utility down the road that we might need it for or whatever, but to have it down the middle of everybody's yards, because that's where it is in this part of town, doesn't make any sense to me. It seems like it's a waste of, it's costing us more in infrastructure and keeping the roads, you know, and the sidewalks paved there because it's a bigger swath to keep, you know, management of. And it, you know, the taxpayers could be paying taxes on that land if they actually owned it. I just think 80 feet is, I mean, that's twice the amount of square footage or footage that most places have. 40 feet is an average right of way in a residential area such as this side of town, the old town. And everybody's building their houses. That's not even 25 foot back. I'm not set 25 foot back from the road. So then now we're looking at all these problems with setbacks right away, straight away. So not only are we talking about the fact that the setbacks aren't being met, there's, you know, all this town-owned land that it is just sitting there, basically. I don't know. To me, it seems completely bizarre. I mean, I get why it originally happened, but I mean, this is 2020. Let's be honest, we're never going to have carts and buggies again, you know, and probably not going to have cars for very much longer. Hopefully, or at least the gas guzzlers. I don't know. And I have seen plenty of deeds that have said one thing and the town says otherwise. And I just don't understand that at all. I don't know how do you rectify that? Like, where does that, you know, what do you do? Do you take the town to court and say, hey, this is my property? I mean, of course, people are just going to be like, town stole some of my land again, you know, because that's kind of what it's like. I've heard that over and over.
Trustee Miller, if I can address a couple of the points. I mean, one, for people curious as to what their property interest is, I mean, you can get a title search fairly inexpensively to get the definitive answer as to what your ownership rights are. And so that would be, you know, if someone's really concerned about this issue and doesn't not believe the town, you can do so on your own for not a lot of money and get a good answer as to, or at least some clarity as to what your ownership rights are. Second, as to the uniqueness of the situation, I can tell you when I was a Denver city attorney, Denver has this exact same problem in the older parts of town where the right of way extends pretty significantly into what people think is their front yards. But really half of their front yard is city and county of Denver right of way for pretty much the same reasons that, you know, Lyons has this giant right of way. And in Denver, as in the town of Lyons, you know, you were allowed to occupy that right of way for a front lawn and have a sidewalk, but you must maintain as a property owner, you know, that land. The town of Lyons is not responsible for that sidewalk or for that front lawn. And that's pretty common in most places, I feel. Maybe not in the newest subdivisions where, you know, you're doing things, you know, a different way, but at least in the older parts of many municipalities, this exact same issue exists. And I think, you know, to get back to your, you know, the root of this question is, why aren't we just getting rid of this land? And that's, you know, one, I think there's a problem in the current Lyons code. There's not really a process to do this. So that's one issue. There's not really a good way to do this except for the sale of the property. And then two, there's no way to kind of wholesale vacate a right of way. We have to go through individually property by property and make those transactions, whether it be a sale, fee simple, or some sort of new code process we invent. And all those things, you know, cost money and time. It's not that we can't do them. It just, there's no good way to do it currently. And this is part of the reason why, and, you know, not just Lyons, but many other places, why these issues exist and have not been addressed, is because it is an expensive thing to undo.
Right. I understand all that. I guess one of my biggest things is if we're going to, I mean, I feel like the process to get access to these right of ways or easements is all red tape. It's all red tape. I haven't even been able to start building my fence yet because I have to go through this whole bunch of rigmarole. And meanwhile, my materials are sitting out there rotting and my dog doesn't have a fence. And it's, you know, that's just me. I'm sure there's tons of other people. I know there's tons of other people. Okay. Several other people that I know of that have had the same issue with getting stuff done like that. There should be a much simpler process to go through it. If that's what's going to happen all over town, and that is what's happening all over town, there has to be a simpler way to do it. I mean, it's just totally frustrating, to say the least.
When is it an encroachment license that you're
Yes.
trying to get? And that's good. So that was one of the things we were talking about. And I would have another example of maybe a reason to simplify the encroachment license or have an option for the administrative review, which I thought was one of the topics on there. So another one in regards to the paving project where we have somebody who didn't know and their driveway is on there and their driveway has been cut back to make room for the sidewalk in the road. And then also was cut back a little further for the electrical conduit. And now we have to see about how we resolve that if we put back the asphalt that was there, but he doesn't have an encroachment license. So you know exactly where things stand. And if we'd ask him to come for an encroachment license, the time and the involvement there seemed to be a heavier burden than they might need to be. So I think that was part of what we were trying to review in the workshop. Was there a reason for the ability for a simpler process in some situations than the trustees?
Would it help if I went through the current process a little more so everybody is aware of it? It was in the memo, but currently there's an application, there's a license for review, and then there's a resolution, and it has to be approved by the Board of Trustees. So there's some time in review where we send it to the Aaron, Dave, the public, and myself. We all review this, Victoria, and then we have to get it on the agenda and get it approved by the Board of Trustees. And so what Aaron was talking about is trying to get, like we discussed earlier, an administrative process whereby it's just the staff reviewing to see if there's any issue. And then we could issue a license administratively. So it'd cut down the time and it would cut down what I think is the slowness of the process. Right now, I've been working with people on a few encroachment licenses, but we were hoping 2 meetings ago to try to get to a admin process. We haven't got there. And so I'm asking anybody that's on hold to go ahead and submit if we're not going to get there. And that's why we had hoped to get there for various fences in town.
And just to leave a little additional background on that, in most municipalities, typically the way this is done is there's a major and a minor encroachment process where for minor things like fences, it can be done administratively. It can be a pretty quick turnaround review. For major encumbrances on the right of way, if you want to put a building in the right of way, that needs to go through the Board of Trustees. And that's typically the way it's done. For most places that don't have, a large public works staff to, really handle this internally. Lines is somewhat unique, and, there's no code language on this. I'm going to go out and look for it. It's all been kind of done by policy over time, but it is kind of unique where every encroachment goes through the legislative body. That's kind of a unique feature of the way we're doing things here.
So I think that's why. So,
for example, the Mojos, when they had a fire, it was determined that a portion of their building was actually in the right of way. So we had them bring in an encroachment permit for that building. And something like that, we would still suggest as staff to bring to the board. Because that's, that's not a simple, you cut off a side of a building or in order to put in a utility or something like that.
Mayor Pro Tem, did you have something to say?
Yeah, a couple of observations and questions. I've been on the board a little over 2 years, and I don't recall ever having seen an encroachment agreement. So how many of them do we have? If the Board of Trustees has to approve them, how come we haven't been seeing them?
Partially because we haven't had any. We do have a number of, we're not always alerted when somebody builds a fence because it doesn't trigger a building permit. In the floodway or the flood zone, a lot of times we are, because it has to go through that process. So there is a possibility where we have missed one or two. Also that we haven't seen people planning and developing in anything other than the setback. They've been going to the Board of Adjustments for development in the setback. However, we did a kind of study several locations in town, and just from a planning level, look at fences in various areas. It looks like we may have a significant number of encroachments that we may want to go back and license if moving forward. Now, those were done historically, but so I haven't seen anything that needed to come to the Board of Trustees for encroachments until recently.
How many encroachment agreements do we have in place across town now, especially for residences?
Let me look that up. I don't have it on the top of my head.
Town Administrator Simonson.
I think the reason you haven't seen them is the exact reason Trustee Miller was referring to. Most people think they own to the curb, so they're just doing it. They're just putting it in. They're putting in fences and gardens and rock walls and signs or whatever it might be, thinking they're perfectly on their property to do it. And then it becomes established and they think it's theirs. And then when something like this major project happens with this paving, I would say at least 10 people said, this is mine. You can't take out my garden. You can't take out my flower bed. You can't take out this and that. And then it comes to realization that your property line is not what you think it is.
So is the staff proposal that if we agree, if the board basically defers its authority to the staff to grant encroachments for minor things like fences and landscaping and maybe sprinkler systems, that type of thing, is it the staff's intent to go around and talk to everybody that doesn't have one but has encroached? I mean, what are we suggesting doing here? I don't understand.
We haven't looked at going backwards in time. We just wanted to see where we were. We our hope was to come up with an administrative process for moving forwards, and maybe the board could provide some direction on how we could, or a recommendation for how we would move backwards. But
would part of your policy be that if the staff denies an encroachment request, that the citizen could appeal to the Board of Trustees? I didn't see that addressed.
No, we didn't address that, but we would support that as staff.
Okay, and let me ask, why is the insurance necessary if the town has governmental sovereign immunity? Is it because there's a tort exposure of a certain amount?
It's not for us, it's for the protection of the owner.
Well,
It's not, we're absolved, but that insurance rider is to protect them and their investment.
we're going to compel the owners to insure themselves for their own good.
We would support, if they wanted to get out of it, but we would recommend they have insurance for the very reason that their investment, their homeowners' investment does not include that adjacent property.
But I thought the proposal in here included an insurance that would name the town as a beneficiary.
Yes.
That's the town's current policy. And once again, it's kind of a standard thing on most of our contracts we do with, whether it be an encroachment permit or a contract with a provider of some kind.
So I guess my question is about the town's exposure. If somebody builds a fence on town right of way, and
We have to take it down
accident-
because
a kid rides a bicycle into it and hurts themselves on the fence, does the town have any exposure because that fence is sitting on its property?
I don't know.
The town probably has governmental immunity to cover that issue. However, there's still the cost of defending that lawsuit,
Right.
even if we have governmental immunity. And there are certain exceptions in the governmental immunity law which may apply, especially with concern of sidewalks. That's probably the biggest one, where unsafe conditions of a sidewalk can be accepted from the Governmental Immunity Act in certain situations. And so, particularly for sidewalks, we would want something. But we in the standard encroachment license the town has currently, we do have an indemnification requirement and insurance.
Okay, I mean, that's my question is why does the town, because I don't know, I'm guessing that insurance coverage could be a significant cost for some homeowners. So my question is that something the town needs to mandate for the town's own protection versus telling the homeowner what's good for them and what they ought to do to protect themselves?
It's for both parties' benefit, certainly for the towns, but more so for the homeowner. The amounts that are in the current encroachment license are very small, relatively speaking. I mean, it's like $25,000 or $100,000, I believe, the last time I looked at it. And that kind of insurance purchase is not a lot for a policy for that small amount.
Trustee Rogan.
Yeah, I'm along those same lines as Mayor Pro Tem. I'm trying to understand the insurance piece here. So if a property owner does not have an encroachment agreement and has a sidewalk or a ditch, and somebody falls in the ditch, who is responsible from an insurance perspective?
From a plaintiff attorney's perspective, I would sue everyone. I would sue the town. I would sue the homeowner. I would sue their homeowner's insurance. You cast a wide net, right? Which is the reason why you have insurance to cover these kinds of things. And sidewalk cases in particular, usually the governmental entity is named as a party in those. And I haven't personally defended one of those, but I know attorneys in our law firm who have, and many other municipal attorneys, where it may be constructed by a municipality, but or on behalf of a municipality, but is owned by a private landowner, and usually both parties get sued.
Okay, so one more question. When it comes to people being able to maybe acquire the land they think they already own, do you know of any municipalities where this has been done?
So typically it's done through a land swap process. Right-of-way vacations happen a lot, where the town needs a certain piece of land and someone wants land somewhere else, and we'll do a swap. That right-of-way vacation happens a lot. In certain, those are unique situations, however. Usually there's some sort of process by which there's an ordinance to, give up the property. If you were to do some standard right-of-way vacation. The place where I've seen it most is in alleys, where the cities don't want to maintain alleys anymore because they're difficult to maintain. And so usually the cities go through a process of, usually it's an ordinance, I believe, to vacate the alley right away to the adjoining homeowner for some nominal amount. And that's usually based off maintenance considerations. But you're going to have to look at each one of these individually, because we don't know what existing utilities are there and what future needs, if any, there may be. So I think in terms of a cost benefit analysis, it's not going to be my time that's going to cost the town money. It's going to be the town engineers and surveyors going and looking at each property and figuring out what's already there and what do we need in the future, and how much can we reduce it without jeopardizing the town's interests.
Trustee Miller.
So I know there's
Sorry.
different right of ways for different utilities, correct? Is that correct?
So we can have, usually there's right of way and there's utility easements. And sometimes we use those interchangeably, but strictly speaking, the right of way is different than a utility easement. We could have utility easements, either a general one or one for specific utilities.
Okay, so, because I was just trying to figure out specifically, are the utilities going down Second are going to be buried underground? Is that correct? Or
Electric, yeah, and sewer and water.
The electric, right. The electric will be, the sewer and water already are, and then the electric will be.
okay, I'm just trying to get a hand because I
And
know.
again, usually you're trying to put those in the right of way, and the right of way is property owned by the town. An easement is a contract or a document that says we have the right to use your property. So if there's an easement on your property, it's yours, you still own that property, but the town or whoever has that easement, CenturyLink or Longmont Water, they have the rights to do certain things when they're needed if it pertains to their utility or a ditch. The ditch companies can have them, but it's basically your property, but you have limits on what you can do with it.
And that's exactly correct. But the only thing I add to that is sometimes in the past, these things may have been referred to interchangeably. You see that sometimes in the record where people call easements right away easements, but they are legally distinct in terms of the ownership that Aaron just spoke of.
So, Madam Administrator, as we discussed this afternoon,
Yes.
you would be fine with any minor agreements and would defer to the Board of Trustees for any buildings or things like that. Is that, do I
Yeah,
understand?
we want to get feedback from the board on if you have an interest in changing our current policy, drafting new code to allow for a minor encroachment license to be approved administratively. We can put in that appeal clause. And then major would still come to the Board of Trustees. Or is there an interest in selling, as you know, that was talked about too, or dedicating right of way in those wider areas?
Any thoughts, Mayor Pro Tem Browning?
As to interest in selling town right of way, the cost to the town of implementing that process seems to be great. If there are particular, these are my thoughts. If a particular landowner wants to approach the town and make an offer to acquire right of way to add to their property, that landowner should bear 100% of the cost of doing that, including paying for the town's engineers and surveys and whatever. It shouldn't be a cost to the town to do that because it's something that would benefit the landowner. And I don't think the incremental tax benefits from somebody's front yard or backyard, for that matter, are going to produce enough revenue for the town to pay for those upfront costs. So I think the policy should be, if a homeowner wants to acquire town right of way, come forward and make us an offer and make sure you bear the expense. That's my thought.
Administrator Simonson?
I think in this situation, having individuals do different things will create a nightmare. It's going to cost a lot in surveys, title work, legal descriptions getting interpreted. I think if you're going to do it, it should be all or none along a block, because it will be so difficult to know if it's a zigzag up and down a block of who owns what.
Yeah. I disagree a little bit, because there may be unique circumstances for particular lots. They're sitting on a corner, doesn't affect the rest of the lots on the street. And I think it'd be a rare circumstance, and it wouldn't cost a lot because, as I just said, the homeowner ought to bear 100% of the expense. So yeah, I agree the town would have issues if it checkerboarded things down a street. but I don't want to totally foreclose the possibility of an individual property owner coming and paying all of the costs, explaining to the town why this would not affect the town adversely. Maybe there are no utilities on that particular piece of property. I don't want to say never, but I don't think it would become a common occurrence.
Any other comments? Trustee Caravas, go ahead.
Go ahead, Paul, if you want to first.
Just a quick comment. The town has vacated right-of-way in the past and in very particular circumstances, and did require the applicant to bear all costs. And oftentimes, at least in one case, they reserved an easement for pedestrian access and utilities. So this has happened, but it's only, I'm seeing in 4 or 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ordinances. And to answer Trustee Browning's question, we did go through and look at the number of encroachment licenses we have to date. Staff went through and identified them. Right now, on our list, we have 17, I believe. So not a substantial amount. We do believe that there are significantly more intrusions.
Trustee Caravas.
I'm a little different. I'm somewhere in between what Victoria and Mark are saying. I wouldn't want to see a patchwork either. I would rather see us take a block and no charge at all. No, not making the homeowner have to pay, basically a quit claim. Just give them the 15 or 20 feet on either side, bringing the right of way from 80 feet to 40 feet or 45 feet or 50 feet, whatever is decided, and use that as a test possibly. On the encroachment side of things, I like the idea the town's brought to us, minors that the staff deal with it, major the board of trustees can deal with it. However, I would rather also at the same time, as time allows and code enforcement has extra time, extra few hours, we need to go back and fix all the old ones too. As of 2016, as I came on the board, the buyout properties in the confluence area were finishing up. And Victoria, please correct my timeline if I'm way off. But as permits were starting to be issued to rebuild, homes were built on the wrong side of property lines. There were issues, and we as a board fairly quickly in 2016, as Mayor Sullivan was seated and the rest of us were seated, we decided flood moving forward. We're following the rules. We're putting everything back the way it should be, using the modern surveying techniques, and that's just the way it's going to have to be. So moving forward, we create less problems, 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road for town staff and boards. So I'd rather see that fixed, because we did make people not only lift homes, but roll them east or west, 5, 10 feet. It unfortunately added cost to those homeowners, but they are no longer encroaching on someone else's property. And after 2 or 3 sales, like we were deal with in 435 Park later in executive session, we're gonna have someone crying to town or coming to us saying we screwed up. Just giving opening doors. So that's kind of where I'm seeing this thing. I'd like to see the encroachment thing fixed. I'd like to see us slowly over time. I'm not saying all has to be done in 2 years, 5 years. It's just a slow process that maybe takes 10 years. That's just the way it is. Because I think we have a mention already in Paul's report this evening. It indicates a wall that's already encroaching the right of way in an alley. So when we put these things into play, these new rules into place, should we do so, we've got to fix those old things. So it may be a heartache for us and staff now, but it hopefully fixes the problem 20, 30 years down the road for everybody else.
Any other comments? Well, what is the board's pleasure? How would we like to proceed? What direction should we give to staff?
Well, I think for now, we should probably tell them to move forward with bringing an encroachment permit minus the red tape to the table, so they can do it administratively. And then maybe in the long term, we can talk about narrowing the right-of-way a little bit. I think that's a much bigger discussion. That's my opinion.
Trustee Rogan.
I agree with Trustee Miller, and I also think there should probably be some sort of education process. I'd be surprised if everybody knew where their actual property lines were considering this. And so in order to not, it would be, I think would be terrible would be for somebody to get a surprise phone call from the town saying, hey, guess what? You need to apply for an encroachment permit because you put a fence in our right of way when they, had no idea where the right of way was. So I think education would be important too.
I do too.
What we don't have are a significant survey. And so to go back and look at each one of these improvements, we have a best guess case about where those are potentially intruding. But without a survey for each one of these properties, we won't know. We do have a property survey for all of the confluence, but not for Nolanville. And so unless we had accurate information for all of town, I think it would be somewhat unfair to use the information just for one area of town to require historic encroachments. I think doing so would require a lot more information than we have, but we're starting to request more information for moving forward. And in order, I just don't see how we could do it going backwards without requiring or doing a whole survey for all of town to know whether that offense is on 2 feet on one side of a property line or 2 feet on the other. So while I appreciate the desire to go back and get encroachment licenses, I think it would be difficult without the significant investment. And I don't know where that investment would be done because we're requiring more and more information as development occurs. With every building permit, if we get more information, then we're looking for that.
Can I address that, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, you may, Trustee Carabas.
We already have rules in the confluence area and floodplain that if you increase your value by 50%, you got to lift your house. Well, we can build into this new code that if you pull a permit, if any member of the board of the current property you own pull a permit and it fits 55, 60, pick a number that's, if you're going to increase the value of your home 65, 70%, well, then you got to get a survey and make sure everything's where it's supposed to be. And if it's not, it needs to be corrected. It's no different than pulling a permit now and you come in and tell me my electrical's outdated and because it's a certain amount of value, I've got to update everything. We already do that. That's been in place for decades in this country. And it's probably time to do it here.
Trustee Miller, you had something to say?
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, I guess it's more of a question. It's kind of a comment, but I guess one of my things with this whole encroachment right-of-way thing is that it goes hand in hand with the R1 district, right? The R1 zoning. We're looking at all these R1 homes that have been built within 10 feet of the road. I know some of the houses up on Stickney that are very close to the road. I mean, they're within feet. And so at a 25-foot setback, that's not happening, that hasn't happened. And those homes have been there for years. at this point, right? So do those property owners not even own the house? Because it's on, I mean, I'm sure they own the house, but do you know what I'm saying? They don't own the land that they're built on, because that's got to be built in the right of way. So it's very confusing to me how this is happening and how this has happened over the years, because it's, we're continually going back to the Board of Adjustments to try and, for this person wants to build a garage, but it's only a 10-foot setback or whatever. And it's like their homes, that's right next to their house that's built on a 10-foot setback, which in all reality probably is on the town right of way. So I'm just trying to figure out, I feel like this is a gigantic problem, and that we might, in order to fix it, we're going to have to offload some of this property by deeding it over to the property owners. Just like Trustee Caravas said, quick claim deed it or whatever. I mean, to me, it's just crazy that it's that close. Paul?
Go ahead, Paul.
So the R1 issue is different than the right-of-way issue. The R1 issue is primarily about setbacks and the intrusion into the setback as opposed to right-of-way. There may be a few buildings in that area that intrude into the right-of-way, but again, we don't have accurate information. We're using planning level data. But when people come in to get a building permit and they bring in their survey level data, we are determining fairly clearly and broadly that in the historic areas of town, especially in alley-loaded lots, that these homes are built within the setback. And I think that had to do with the lack of surveying that was done when these were built and the lack of understanding at that time. I have no proof of that, but we also rezoned in the 80s. During that time, the town applied what was a suburban zoning in these historic areas of downtown. So the town at that point created an issue whereby we applied this suburban zoning that was typically front-loaded with garages in the front that would have a typical setback in the historic areas of town, and created non-conforming buildings at that time. We had no grandfathering clause to allow those buildings to be non-conforming. So I think the issues are separate, just to be clear. And I'm happy to go into the R1 a little bit more, but I just wanted to show the difference between them.
Further comments?
I have one, just that the area that is in question right now, other than North Old Town, the area around Park Street and 2nd, many of those are not R1. Many of those are R2.
Correct.
Mayor Pro Tem Browning.
My comment on the R1 zoning and setbacks issue is based on what the staff has told us, that it would cost too much to try to fix that, to go in and rezone it, too many surveys, too much cost. And although I understand why the Board of Adjustments doesn't like to continually hear lot by lot variance requests, it seems like to me that that's the most economical way to do it. And that so many of these things are particular to individual lots, and that a wholesale approach of trying to fix all this with a massive surveying, creating a new zoning district, just costs too much. And as clunky as it is, I think the existing process is about the best we can do without spending a whole lot of money. And I'm not in favor of spending a whole lot of money to try to rezone the old parts of town.
Further comments, Trustee Miller?
Maybe I haven't made myself clear. I am talking about the fact that the right of way is 80 foot wide. Okay. So let's talk about Stickney for a minute. If you go up to Stickney and 3rd and you're looking at that street is not 80 feet wide.
Correct.
But there are houses built within that 80 feet. See what I'm saying?
I think Stickney has a smaller dimension to it.
So it's not a 80 foot right away. It's a
No.
smaller.
That's a smaller right of way. Seward and Reese are.
Town Administrator Simonson.
I think
Sorry.
those homes north of Main Street also were probably built prior to having a setback rule. There may have been a basic right of way, but I doubt there were setbacks. Those were probably adopted 40 to 50 years later.
Oh,
Yes, they were. We had a residential zoning without setbacks at one point in time. I think that was in the 20s. But in the 60s, when R1 was applied throughout town, that's when I think it was the 60s or 70s. I can't recall. I have to go back and check. That's when that setback was applied systematically in many areas, that are creating this this issue today. So it was a town initiated issue with that R1. The PCDC does recommend rezoning, but wanted to default to the Board of Trustees and maybe even delay rezoning till after we study things like street sections in the comprehensive plan. If we do not have this in our budget.
further comments? Mayor Pro Tem Browning.
Does the PC have a estimate of cost to do that and a suggestion of how to pay for it?
The PCDC does not have a suggestion of how to pay for it. The PCDC did not estimate cost, but we think it would be about 10 hours of attorney time plus staff time. So it would be, there would be mailings and a survey. We don't have a cost on the survey as of yet. The last time we did a survey for the rezoning of the overlay district, I think that survey cost around $5,000 to $6,000. I need to go back and look at that invoice. But the area is probably 3 times that size. We have yet to go and spend the staff time to examine the full extent of the problem. We did do an initial visual survey and believe we have a pretty good idea of where that is.
My feedback to the PCDC would be the Board of Trustees would like to see, at least this trustee would like to see what the time and cost estimates are before we launch it to that, rather than just adopt it as a concept and then figure out later how much it's going to cost us. I think the cost is important and it's an upfront, not an after the fact consideration.
Further comments? Trustee Rogan.
Thank you. Maybe I'm confused here, but I fail to see how rezoning could possibly solve the problem of maybe somebody's house is built on town land and they don't know it. So, and I believe that's what Trustee Miller is getting at. Of course, you can tell me if that's not right, but that seems like that's a big potential problem.
There's 2 separate issues, one being the right-of-way issue and one being the zoning issue. And we're being conflated in this conversation a lot, but they're entirely separate. And the amount of overlap there may be is pretty small, if any. It's really, there's the, I'll call it the Stickney problem, where we have houses encroaching on the setback, and we have other parts of town issue or houses that are encroaching upon the right of way. They're two entirely separate discussions.
Well, I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Browning, although I mentioned Chairman Eister's suggestion that we correct the situation in regard to setbacks, so that the Board of Adjustments didn't have to continually process requests. But after further discussion, like I said, I do agree with Mayor Pro Tem Browning, both from the standpoint of costs and honestly, that's what the Board of Adjustments is for. The other thing is, I think that we should, in regard to fences and minor items like that, we should make that administrative. And for major renovations, that should come to the Board of Trustees. I don't see a problem with those issues. And I also agree with Mayor Pro Tem Browning in regard to costs. I'd like to know exactly how much the concept of rezoning would cost and whether that's really the direction that we need to go. Go ahead, sir.
This might be a question for Brandon. Considering the request of the PCDC to, give them the authority to rewrite and do the setback zoning issue, I agree with my colleagues on the cost, especially now as we've talked with budget in the coming years. But is there a way to write the code or take their recommendations and write code, but not necessarily act on it and fund it later, as in 7, 8, 9 years from now, we're saving a couple $100,000 for clawback and say it doesn't occur and we have extra monies, which the board had originally talked about, it can then be used? Or do you just not deal with it and deal with it at that, not deal with it now, then deal with it at that point of time, Brandon?
I think it's entirely up to the Board of Trustees how to approach that issue. I don't think it's going to take a lot of legal time to do a rezoning. It's really the survey, determine the boundaries of the zone. It's that kinds of things that's going to cost money. The zoning ordinance itself is pretty simple. It's just more of the other stuff. And if the PCDC wants to work on that now and not enactment, that's certainly something the town can do if it wants to.
So we can give them direction, put something together, let us know, kind of run some numbers, give us costs, so this board has what that really is, and put in that code that right now the board chooses to let the Board of Adjustments do what the mayor just said is what they do. And then some board in the future can then go, you know what, we've got this written, it's in here, let's enact it now. Can that be done in our code?
It certainly can. It still, I think, doesn't avoid the issue and potential costs, I guess, to really determine the boundaries of the zone. That's really the key part.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further discussion?
Yes.
Go ahead.
And Attorney Dittman, you may be able to help me with this more, but my understanding is that the Board of Adjustments is not to engage in wholesale kind of rezoning. They can only evaluate each case on a case-by-case basis, and based on hardship and many other criteria, can only approve a variance for those criteria. So while they can still continue to evaluate each case, they have to do that individually and can't fix this problem in the way zoning would.
That's correct. And I think the previous discussion was concerning PCDC, not the Board of Adjustments, but certainly the Board of Adjustments purview is to do individual case-by-case analysis based on the factors that are written into the code and state law. They can't do any policy making. It's not part of their duties.
And so by, they wouldn't be able to just say in this area, what the staff has identified, we will allow intrusions into the setback.
No, that'd be on the purview as a board.
Right. Thank you.
So what is the conclusion of this workshop?
Well, because it's a workshop, you can't really give us a formal direction, but I think staff have heard in general that we should pursue a minor encroachment policy change with the ability to appeal that to the Board of Trustees if someone doesn't agree. And major would continue to go to the Board of Trustees and then look at what it would cost. Well, determine the boundaries of the zones that are most affected in Old Town and come back with an estimate of what it would cost to have that surveyed and bring forward a recommendation. That's what I'm hearing. Anything different?
Any other additions? Mayor Pro Tem.
Then there's the question of right-of-ways. And like I say, we may have some disagreements on this. My position is the town should not open up a right-of-way for sale program, but that the town should entertain specific requests from particular property owners that might be interested in acquiring right-of-way if they pay all the expense. But I don't think we should stick for sale signs on all of our right-of-way and say, make us an offer. I think that's the situation now, frankly. I think if any property owner wants to come to the town and say, hey, on my particular lot, there's no sewer lines, there's no water lines. I don't know why the town has to have 30 feet of my lot. I'd like to offer the town X dollars and I'll pay for the survey cost. I think we could entertain that now. So I don't think that requires a policy change. But if the question is making a policy change, which is that the town will open itself up to do a right-of-way sale town-wide, I don't think we should do that. I think it's asking for trouble. So that's my position on the right-of-way.
Yeah, I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Browning on that. I think we're just opening up a hornet's nest if we do that. I agree with everything that Town Administrator Simonson has said, except the last about a town-wide survey. I don't think that's appropriate.
Okay.
So maybe not a full survey, but a kind of a boundary outline of where this affects that staff could just do at our level.
If that information is easily obtainable, I mean, Director Brown talked about a 1880s or whatever plat of the town that was done. I mean, do we even still have that? And can it be transposed on what we currently have?
Mm-hmm. Actually, most of that hasn't changed very much.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, we did do a control survey in 2015 for the southern part of town, but we never did one for that area. And so there's, we don't know intrusions as much as we do on a case-by-case basis. But I think bringing back a recommendation for what the survey would cost is what I heard, as opposed to doing a survey, so that we try to get towards the boundary. And once we do that, then we can more accurately reflect a quote of what the rezoning would take. At this point, it's more difficult.
And that's just for the area to be rezoned.
All costs.
Oh, sorry.
All costs, Paul. Not
all costs, right?
All costs. Thank you.
Thank you. I just meant with regard to the survey. Thank you.
Councilor.
And Paul, you're referring to a survey just for the areas to be rezoned, not for the entire town. Is that correct?
Correct. So we would bring the costs of rezoning back as we and the plant staff and the PCDC work on a recommendation for rezoning to prepare for the time when, if and when the town has sufficient funding to undertake that that project.
Any other comments? I think staff has direction. Am I correct? Okay.
We feel so.
And in the meantime, we need to proceed with the current policy, as the earliest this could be proposed would be August 17th. And I don't know if the attorney has time to rewrite that language, or if it would be set. Our next meeting after that's not till September 6th. There's 3 weeks between. So that would be first reading, second reading, end of September. It wouldn't go into effect till the end of October.
Okay. If there are no further comments or questions.
Planner Paul does.
Go ahead.
I have a question on that.
Go ahead.
Since this is not in an ordinance right now, other than signs, why do we have to wait till a new ordinance is in place to? I don't know if this policy of everything going to the Board of Trustees was adopted by a Board of Trustees resolution, or whether it was adopted by staff practice over the years or Board of Trustees practice over the years. So, I mean, we don't have an ordinance now to amend, so I don't see why a policy can't be changed without going through the whole ordinance process. We should do that to make it clear and put it in the code. I agree, but I don't know why we have to wait until an ordinance is effective. Brandon, I don't know.
I think that's you're right. It's unclear how this policy started originally, but basically it's akin to an administrative regulation at this point. That's just how we're going to proceed. But it seems to me like we could pass a resolution saying the policy of the town is to do this in the meantime, and then have an ordinance following it up. The resolution would take a lot less time than an ordinance. So.
Yeah. Yeah, we could do a resolution. We could do a resolution at the next meeting saying allowing administrative review of minor encroachments as an interim policy until we adopt an ordinance. So I don't think we have to delay it till September.
I would concur. Thank you.
I think you have a majority of concurrence, Counselor.
We can certainly get that drafted. It'll just be recognizing the existing policy, the change, and setting some, some previews of what the ordinance may be coming forward in September.
Trustee Lowell, your opinion? Okay. All right. Anything else? All right. Thank you. We'll take a break and we'll see everybody for the regular meeting. Get some rest. It's going to be a long one.
No.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir.